And good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to Chalk Talk. I'm your host, Kim Davis. Today is Tuesday, September the 19th. Welcome to Chalk Talk. I am super excited about today's show. I'm usually excited, but I'm even more excited today because we have one of my favorite, and apparently one of your favorite because you're always asking me about him, guest joining us today. Brandon Scott is going to be our live guest today on Chalk Talk. So I'm excited about that. There is also a lot happening. We are now through 2 weeks of the NFL season. We're going to talk about the Houston Texans. They're 0-2. What does it mean? I will say do not jump off the building just yet. It is week 2. We'll talk about the concerns. We'll talk about the things that look good. We're also going to talk about those Houston Astros and this Major League Baseball race. You'll hear from Dusty. You'll hear from Verlander. And you'll also hear from Ryan Presley, who had a rough inning last night in the ninth. The Astros lost that game. A tough one to lose against the Baltimore Orioles. They are 4-6 over the last 10 games, but they wake up today still a game and a half ahead in the American League West, ahead of the Rangers and the Mariners. But they've got to win. Okay, we're going to let you hear from some of them, and we're going to also let you hear from some of the Houston Texans. Other news we're going to talk about: Jerry Jones says, "Hey, you know what? I'd love to have somebody, I don't know, maybe a black owner in the NFL." Really, Jerry? Are you just talking because of those comments that came out from Jim Trotter? Or do you mean that? We'll talk about NFL ownership and a whole lot more. But before we get started, a couple people we have to make sure that you know about that help us do this show each and every week. Our good friends over at I Love Jinka. Of course, it is the season where people are starting to have some, that respiratory stuff going on. Listen, you need some Jinka in your life. It's great for inflammation, joints, pains, shoring up rather your immune system. Anything that can that causes inflammation, Jinka can help you with it. You can get it in a paste, in the capsule, and pretty soon there are going to be some other ways you can get it. But if you are in Texas, you're lucky because you can go to HEB and find it. Any place else, you have to go to their website, ilovejinka.com. If you are in Texas, this is where you find it if you go into an HEB store.
Here at HEB, in the Healthy Living Department, the probiotics, you can find Jinka 7 days a week.
Yeah. Look at that Jinka sale. Look at that Jinka.
And also, listen, we often talk about not just women, but men. What do we do with our skin? There's so much stuff in the air, and anti-aging is a really big theme. We know there's a gazillion products on the market. What I'll tell you is call Stephanie at Sohum Skincare. She can tell you about your skin. She can help you find products, and she can also give you the absolute most amazing facial you have ever had. Don't forget about your Kimmy treats. They are in stock at Sunshine's Vegetarian Deli. If you're in Houston, over on Old Spanish Trail between 288 and Alameda, there's the popcorn, the Kimmy bars, and also the cookies. You guys asked for all of it, and there is still some body butter in stock. You can go there and find it, or you can also buy Kimmy treats online. Listen, if you need great snacks for this football season, baseball season, and soon to be basketball season, you need Kimmy treats in your life. So the popcorn comes in 3 flavors. There is vegan chili cheese, vegan ghost pepper, and vegan truffle. Of course, there are also the Kimmy bars and the body butter. You can get all of it. And listen, you need it. All right, so welcome back. We're going to jump right into it. Brandon, did I say Cooks earlier? I think I may have said that. That is absolutely not what I meant. I definitely meant Brandon Scott. I just thought about, did I say Cooks? Brandon Scott is joining us. I'm excited. We're going to go through some sound we have from the Texans and some Astros and get his thoughts on just what we've seen so far. Some unfortunate injuries to start the season-ending injuries early. And we're going to talk about the Texans' young quarterback, which through week 2 you kind of think they got the right one. So if you will, help me welcome in now to the show, Brandon Scott.
So first of all, thanks for having me, Kim. And I'm going to say, I don't know if you said Cooks, but I heard Scott. I feel like I heard Scott.
Okay, good. I feel better. I think I
and-
said it. Okay, good.
And I will take it either way. Glad to be on the show, whether I'm referred to as Brandon Cooks, Brandon Scott. Either way, it's me here, one way or another. And I would also say that I would co-sign the Kimmy's Treats on all of the truffle, all of the popcorn, every iteration that you have. I would co-sign as a living witness of how good it is.
Thank you. Good morning. I appreciate it. And you listen. I need to say stop because when I tell you the Chalk Talk audience will ask, hey, when are you going to have Brandon Scott back? So they know. So I don't want to throw them off and think I got the wrong Brandon.
Right.
So it's important that they know that I did what they asked me to do. How are you this morning, my friend?
I was going to say maybe one of the few audiences that we'll find out there that prefers Brandon Scott over Brandon Cooks. And to the Chalk Talk audience, I appreciate y'all for that. I am humbled and appreciate y'all for that.
Now, listen, let's be clear. They didn't say they prefer you on the football field. But in this chair.
Well, that would be crazy.
But in this chair, I think they still would prefer you than Brandon Cooks. So welcome. Before we get into the show, is there anything burning on your mind? There's been so much happening in the world of sports that you're like, you know what, Kim, this is something that I definitely want to talk about. What is that thing?
Well, for me right now, it's just the quarterback conversation that I'm just like stuck on, Kim. Like what the Texans have or potentially have in CJ Stroud, and it's only 2 games in. And I'm not one to overreact to 2 games, but I do like to live in the moment and to think of, hey, based off of what we've seen through 2 weeks of the NFL season, you feel pretty good about where, if you're a Texans fan, you don't feel good about the team because the team's not worth a quarter yet, and they're not good yet. But the quarterback specifically, if we're just having a very specific conversation, Kim, about quarterbacks, not about the team, not about the league, but quarterback specifically, you've got to feel good about what the Texans have done with CJ Stroud, both in drafting him and in how he's been developed so far. And it might just speak to his overall readiness to begin with. But when you compare it to what all you've seen from, let's say, his rookie counterparts in Anthony Richardson and Bryce Young. Now, Anthony Richardson has actually looked fine, but he's got a recklessness about him that's got to scare you if you're a Colts fan. You got to be thinking like, hey, I see what's there, but I don't know how long that dude's going to be on the field because he throws his body around and he's kind of operates with reckless abandon. And it just hasn't come together yet for Bryce Young. Not to say that it won't or that it won't look better even next week, but 2 weeks in, right now, the Texans have to feel really good about what they've done at quarterback. And then, of course, this is not to pile on Deshaun Watson. I don't like to lean into the Deshaun Watson hate. You know, he's gone now. But in terms of just localizing it for what our interests are here in Houston, it is in the Texans' best interest for him to not be good, for the Browns to not be good. And so coming off of watching Monday Night Football, Kim, I am just fascinated by the quarterback conversation of, think about a couple of years ago where we were thinking like, man, I can't believe they messed this up with Deshaun Watson. I can't believe Deshaun Watson has messed this up for himself. And now here we are, fast forward, he's over there in Cleveland kind of just treading water. And the Texans actually seem like they are up in that position. They still got a lot of work to do on as far as the team is concerned, but I feel pretty good about it.
So let me tell you, I will co-sign the CJ Stroud conversation. And here are the things about him that I feel good about. You see his growth. You know, we saw it from when he was drafted through the summer. We see it through camp. And you see it through each week. And one of the things that head coach DeMeco Ryans says is he doesn't make the same mistake twice. He is such a sponge for knowledge and information. So we see that with him. We saw him in week 2, although he had no protection up front, running for his life, but being able to stand in the pocket, make the right plays. Did he make some mistakes? Are there a couple throws he'd like to have back? I'm sure, but he didn't turn it over. And I've heard a couple guys on a station, we won't say which one, talk about how, well, but those sacks are really kind of like turnovers. No, they're not turnovers. If you don't lose the ball, if you don't throw it to the other team, it's not an interception. So we're going to go with he's doing a pretty good job of taking care of the ball. But Brandon, I was impressed with how he stood in the pocket and was able to make some plays and make some throws. That looks good. He was able to connect with different receivers. Seeing he and Nico connect is good because we've been wondering who is Nico Collins going to be. So I am encouraged by what I've seen from CJ Stroud, especially with the running back room that, let's face it, is not one of the most highly touted in the league. If you think about who's in that room, not running back, receiver room. Robert Woods has been a reliable veteran. We expect that. Tank Dell, we'll see what he can do and what his body will allow him to, absorb and hold on to. And Nico, a healthy Nico Collins, looks like he may be the guy that they thought he could be when they drafted him almost 3 years ago. So all that to be said, there are some positives, but there's a lot to be concerned about. Before we go to that, I'm going to let you guys hear from CJ Stroud as he talks about his growth, even just from week 1 to week 2.
I definitely think something that I took from college was like kind of what I implied earlier was like it's going to be hard early, and as you just keep going, you keep banking mental reps. Like, okay, I seen that coverage, I seen that blitz, or I seen this, I seen that. I'm gonna put that in the back of my mind for next time. And sometimes even you don't need it next time. You get it the first time and you kill them. And I definitely think that that's something that I'm trying to do is just every week take a step. And I think I've taken a huge step from last week, just from operation in the huddle to understanding clock management to all those little things. And then I think football's football though. Like, those guys are really good. Like the Colts defensive line was really good. Their linebackers flew around. The DBs were solid. Kenny Moore is an all-pro nickel and cornerback. And credit those guys, but I definitely think that we have what it takes to win games. And I definitely think if we put it together earlier, then we won't be in a tough situation towards the back end. So I definitely think that's what I'm doing with my routine, is just getting better.
Thank you. I think he summed it up, right? And then the way that he stands in, he answers questions. It's authentic. He's honest, and he didn't throw his offensive line under the bus. He kept saying, "Listen, you know what? Those guys are going to be okay. I've been hit before." I mean, he sounds like a veteran. He sounds like a veteran, and it's really kind of cool.
I love hearing him at the podium. Him and Will Anderson, for that matter, both of the guys that the Texans drafted in the first round are just a breath of fresh air to hear speak publicly and at the podium specifically. But aside from that, you asked what's got me burning up, like what am I really passionate about? That just reminded me, because he was very diplomatic about that. DeMeco Ryans was diplomatic about some things when he talked to you guys when he talked to the media on Monday. But in that clip right there, he's obviously going to be a good teammate and not throw his teammates under the bus. And maybe he doesn't even view it this way. I'm not saying that deep down he wants to. I'm not trying, no conspiracy theory or anything like that. But I've heard, Kim, a lot of talk about what CJ Stroud did in garbage time, how there was a bunch of empty stats, and how he was slinging it around once the game was over with. And that's in large part, I understand why that is, though, Kim, right? Because we saw the game. We saw what happened. Their first drive of the game, he gets strip sacked, and then they go back and they score on the first play. And so almost 5 minutes into the game, roughly around about 5 minutes into the game, they're down 14-0. The whole game felt like garbage time because of that. Because it's deflating, especially if you're rooting for a team, it's deflating to be down 14-0 with less than 6 minutes into the game. I understand that. But he went right back down and marched him down for a touchdown, okay? And it was 14-7 within no time. And even before that.
Before you go any further, hold that thought. I just got to say this about that strip sack. If you come out of the huddle and you are met with 3 defensive linemen in your face, you're probably going to get sacked.
That's the point. And that's exactly what I'm so glad you said it, because that's exactly what I was going to say. People knocking him for the strip sack and fumbling. And there are times where he might hold on to the ball a little bit for too long, or where you want to make sure ball security is of utmost priority. But that specific play was a case of 3 out of the 5 offensive linemen getting beat. He was sacked by one dude and would have been sacked by another or another if it wasn't that one, right? Like that was a situation where that play was going to fail no matter what because the guys up front could not protect and could not keep him upright. And sure, yeah, he gets hit from his blind side. You got a dude playing left tackle that played left guard the week before, and normally you got an all-pro sitting there. Yeah, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different, especially for a rookie. So, like, come on, man, this whole garbage time thing. Like, well, let's not even watch the game. Let's just cut the game off at that point once they get down 14-0, and let's not evaluate anything that happens after that. That wouldn't be fair, and that wouldn't be reasonable, right? So
it would not be reasonable. Yeah.
And we had to do that, and then he goes down and has a fantastic drive. Him and Nico Collins, like you were mentioning, they start to have that connection. He has that connection with Robert Woods as well. Tank Dell, you see, get involved more so than he did in the first week. And over the course of the game, even though the Texans are clearly overmatched, clearly not good enough to win the game, there are times in which you look at the quarterback and think, well, at least they've got a quarterback that can keep them in the game and keep them somewhat semi-competitive, or at least keep this thing interesting. And he did that at various points in the game. I think of a specific play in the fourth quarter where it's like 4th and 5, and they got to have the play just to keep the game alive. And he hits Robert Woods with a dart right between 2 defenders. Like, there are moments like that where you can say, hey, the game's out of reach. The score is like, 31-10, whatever. It's a 2-score game at that point. And in the fourth quarter, I get the game. That probably would be considered garbage time. But he's doing things throughout the game that are evidence of how good he can be.
You're right. And I think here's the thing. When you talk about garbage time, so he should quit. The team should stop trying to win. I think the fact that but people call it garbage time. I call it them fighting, trying to come back. And I also want people to know who didn't really watch the whole game. They took 2 touchdowns off the board, 14 points because of offensive penalties, illegal procedure, and a false start. Yeah. So it wasn't like they never had a shot. I do say, listen, you got to give Shane Steichen credit. He called a heck of a game. It was a heck of an offensive game plan. And so that's one thing. The Texans defense looked not
overwhelmed.
Yeah, it looked overwhelmed at times, and that's surprising. I mean, it can happen. I also say it's week 2. Like, it's week 2. And, it's early. I don't think they're going to look quite like that again. I think back to preseason, the way the defense showed up against the run against the Dolphins, or did not show up against the run against the Dolphins, and how they worked on that before they went to New Orleans for that final preseason game. And it's preseason, but my point is, I don't think you're going to see a lot of that. I don't know what the problem is. I'm just going to say this, and we're going to move on and talk about a little something else. I think the Texans still do have a talent deficit. I don't feel I've never felt super confident about Nick Caserio in his role, and nothing has happened to make me feel that way yet. I think CJ was the right choice. I feel good about it. I mean, Will Anderson so far. There's been some pieces, but there's some concerns that 3 years in to this experiment with him in charge and the roster that is assembled, you got to have something to work with.
Yeah, the biggest indictment, if there was one thing that I would be concerned about or would be frustrated about from a Texans fan perspective, is going into the game, it was a legitimate question, an unanswered question of who do you like, whose situation do you like more? Because they're in similar spots in their process and where they are in building their teams. Do you like the Colts situation more, or do you like the Texans situation more? And I thought it was a fair question. You can answer however you want. But going into the game, it was a fair question. After the game, I don't know how you could feel any differently other than liking the Colts situation, because I feel like Shane Steichen won the coaching matchup. As much as that pains me to say, I feel like Shane Steichen won the coaching matchup. CJ Stroud looked great, or looked really good, but before Anthony Richardson got hurt, he looked pretty good too. And so you think, okay, if you say the quarterback situation is a wash, they both got it right. Let's just say they both got it right on quarterback, and they won the coaching matchup, and they already had a little bit more talent institutionally to begin with than the Texans did, and they're going from where the Texans are, kind of starting from like they already have a head start and then seem to be doing a better job with it from there. So if there's anything that I would say that I don't feel great about, is that I feel like the Colts are further along in their process than the Texans are. And so, and that could change, obviously. The feeling on that could change just based off of a few players. CJ Stroud and Will Anderson could be erasers. They could be so great that it doesn't matter that you feel that way. But based off of week 2, based off of this specific matchup, that's how I feel right now. And I don't think that that's something that Texans fans would feel great about.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, there's just no way to watch Sunday's game and not feel like, and if you talk about the coaching matchup, that the Colts didn't win that. Like you, I still feel good about DeMeco, and I still rest on it's week 2, and we can't really say rookie coach because so is Shane Steichen, but the game plan they put together looked really good. I mean, it was creative, it was fun to watch, and so another concern that I have had, in terms of this Texans organization, has been what kind of play caller will Bobby Slowick be? Yeah. I don't know yet. I'm not ready to say he's not it because it's 2 weeks in. And so the thing that I think it's early, and 2 weeks in, I want to see the adjustments they make and how they adjust and get ready to head into what's going to be a very difficult game in Jacksonville. To say this team missed Jimmy Ward, probably even more than Jalen Petrie last week, I think is an understatement. When you talk to guys on the defense, they talk about how Jimmy Ward makes this defense go. So defensively, we'll see. There's a lot of time left. Yeah,
and I know we want to move on, but I did not mean to bypass your point about Caserio, because this is a make or break year for him, right? Like we've been here for this, and we've seen how the first 2 years were treated with kid gloves and a lot of excuse making for why it couldn't work and why it is the way it is. And I think we could understand some of those excuses because a lot of them were valid and legitimate. But I do feel like this is the year where it's like, all kid gloves off at this point. And it's a fair evaluation. Okay, how much talent has been brought in here? And at what point does this thing start to go? Only but for so long can you rely on the excuses of the regime of the past or what you inherited or what the circumstances are. And to your point, as far as like how talented this team is, like I think there have been some good things and some bad things. It's a little bit of a mixed bag right now with Nick Caserio. But this is the make or break year. And you go into this game, into the home opener, and think, man, the Texans invested more in their offensive line than anybody has, period. And can't none of them play. They all either hurt,
none of them play,
or not good, or some combination of both, right?
Or you just missed on it, right? You missed on it. And here's the thing. You don't get to not be good at your job for 3 years most times. I mean, you just don't. And there have been some things you can say, well, they got CJ Stroud, they pulled the trigger and they got Will Anderson, and there have been some good things. You can say Dameon Pierce, you got lucky in the 4th round. And then we're going to see with Dameon Pierce. I mean, let's talk about DP. What have they broken him? Have they said, listen, we need you to do more, be more of a finesse guy and not bulldoze your way through? If I didn't know DP, if I hadn't covered him his rookie season and up to now, I would say, well, maybe he's just trying to save his body since running backs get hurt. That's not who he is, right? If you cover him, that's not how I don't see that being who he is. I think he would take direction and coaching, but listen, they didn't have any holes last year. He made the holes. What is happening? It's just a lot of things to be concerned about. So,
I think it's a combination of two things. Okay. And so I would say both of these things are worth considering. The offensive line is the more obvious one.
Yes.
It's not as good. And that's not to say that last year's offensive line, was great.
Can we just stop for a moment? How sad is that to say that this one is not as good as last year?
I'm going to pause though, Kim. I'm going to give it a moment. Like this one is obviously not as good because it's got a bunch of backups on it, and it's a rookie center on top of that. And I'm not one that thought Scott Quessenberry was great last year, but he wasn't a rookie. And I think Jared Patterson's been, okay or fine, all things considered. Like, You know,
Yeah.
like this is not the situation he's supposed to be in either. So all of that considered, okay, first off, the offensive line is not as good. But then the second thing that I would point to, and this is going to sound like some excuse making, but I do want people to consider it. I think this year is also accounting for the fact that they got competent quarterback play. And so he is not the focal point, even though maybe he should be. I'm not saying maybe he shouldn't be, but I don't think that he's necessarily the automatic focal point of the offense. Like once it becomes clear after the first couple of weeks of the season last year, right? When it becomes clear that Davis Mills is not quite, starting caliber quarterback. And then when it becomes clear that Rex Burkhead probably shouldn't be on the team, probably should be coaching running backs before playing running back, that okay, we're Damian Pierce or bust, basically, is the offense last year. Whereas this year, I don't know if they necessarily feel that way. I feel like because they've got a little bit more confidence in the quarterback from the beginning with CJ Stroud, that you're going to see a little bit of a de-emphasizing of Damian Pierce. But that doesn't excuse what we're seeing in terms of production. Like this offensive line, I know, like I said, it's a makeshift offensive line, but it's still got to do better than this. Like, I don't care if you're first string, second string, third string, fourth string, whatever, practice squad,
You're
whatever.
a National League football player.
You got to be better than this. You got to be better than
this.
If you're out there, you got to be better than this. And so I think that's part of what it is. It's like, hey, we're watching a makeshift offensive line and an offense that is going to feature the quarterback a little bit more. And with that, Damian Pierce is not necessarily the same player that he was last year. But they got to figure out a way to
but that's
maximize.
Not what they say, though. That's not what they say they are. They say that they want to be a run team. I mean, that's not what they say.
You need the dudes up front to do that. You need the
dudes up front to do it. And here's the other thing. If clearly you don't have the dudes up front, they're just not good. They can't run block. Let's just be honest. Then I'm not saying go to a run and shoot, but you're going to just throw the ball. Don't run them into a wall. You know what I mean? I think they've got to do something. Now we're going to see what Bobby Slowick has. Like, he's going to have to be a little more innovative is the word I use. I mean, if it was Pep Hamilton now, we'd be trying to tar and feather him after 2 weeks. We need to see Bobby Slowick do some things differently. I like him. All right. I've heard highlights of the West Coast offense, but what we're seeing so far, there are very few highlights except the things that we're able to see from the passing game in CJ Stroud, even though he's got absolutely no protection up front. Before we hop on and we're going to talk a little bit of Astros and we're going to come back to football, I want to let you hear from DeMeco, who talked about the defense, right? Which is what we all thought was going to be the thing this team can hang his hat on. Didn't look like it on Sunday.
Today we weren't good enough. And if we want to be a good defense, it all starts up front, right? Stopping the run. We did not stop the run. We did not tackle well. Fundamental football wasn't good enough. If you want to win games in this league, we got to play better. Third down, situational football, all right, red zone, again, wasn't good enough. We gave them 4 ops in the red zone, and they scored on all 4 ops. So for us, you have to eliminate teams from scoring in the red zone. You have to own it and make them kick field goals. We didn't do that today.
Yeah. I mean, they didn't do any of that today, right?
None of that.
They didn't do
not
any
enough
of
of
that.
it anyway.
Not enough of it. One of my friends, Mike Patton from Nashville, who hosts a tour in the AFC South show, he asked us, and I think we talked about how the team was progressing through 2 games. How much do you think Metchie will be involved as the team continues to progress? So Metchie got his first action on Sunday since he's been in the NFL, recovering from cancer. I think he was a part of, I think 14 snaps. He was targeted once. He completed a 17-yard pass. I think it's going to take him a minute, but listen, you have to think about not just how long it's been since he played football, but what he overcame. So just being able to be on the field was a first step for him, and to be active, and he was super grateful about that, right? And so I think we'll have to see, and getting his timing down and being healthy. And I don't know the answer to that, Mike, but I think that we'll see it. I'm glad that that he was able to be active on Sunday. I think he'll be used more and more as his body and his ability, his timing and stuff warrants.
Yeah, I'm with that. Both things that you just said that I think were key. How much time he missed and what all he went through. Okay. And this is an encouraging part about the wide receiving core is 2 weeks into the season. I feel like Texans fans should feel a lot better about the wide receiving core than maybe they did going in. All this talk about how there ain't no number one and the wide receiving core is weak. And we still don't think that it's necessarily a strong group per se. But I think Robert Woods and Nico Collins have shown you a lot more than maybe you were expecting going into the season through the first 2 weeks. And then if John Mechie, and then of course you saw Tank Dell a little bit more in week 2 as comparison to week 1. And if John Mechie can progress and turn a corner and develop into what I think they drafted him to be, now you might be cooking with grease a little bit offensively. And it just comes back to whether that offensive line gets whole. So I'm really excited about both what we've seen so far from the wide receivers not named John Mechie, and the fact that I feel like that gives him time. The fact that, hey,
Right.
maybe there's not a spotlight on these guys of how bad they are over the next few weeks since they've been okay. Maybe they're actually okay. And that gives John Mechie a little bit of time to get it right.
Very good point. Brandon Scott from Sports Radio 610 is joining me today on Chalk Talk. So glad to have him. Mike also says Robert Woods looked revived going from the Titans to the Texans. He did look revived. I mean, he has been that veteran blanket, if you will, that CJ needs. But I will tell you something, Mike and Brandon and the rest of the audience, Dalton Schultz has been a little bit of a, where is he? What's he doing? I think that was a thought from Dalton Schultz, that's what he would give you, the tight end that they brought in from the Cowboys. I see you, Tony Dale. Welcome to the show. Speaking of Cowboys, we're going to talk about your Cowboys at 2-0. I'm not really sure what's going on with him.
Yeah, it's not good so far. Like it's really underwhelming. You would figure he would be a safety blanket. He would be somebody that CJ Stroud could rely on, similar to Robert Woods. Not to say it had to be one or the other, but you would think that both of those guys would be someone that CJ Stroud could rely on, especially as a rookie in his offense. But I think it's worth noting that the tight ends have just not really felt like they've been super featured and utilized in this offense quite yet. And I don't know if that's more about the offense itself, the play calling with Bobby Slowick, or if it's about the tight ends and them just not really looking like they've got much to offer. Like I was really expecting Dalton Schultz, and there were many of us, I think, that were saying this, that Dalton Schultz could be their best pass catching option, period. Like he would be their number one. And we were trying to think of who's the number one receiver, who's going to lead the Texans in receiving yards this year. And a lot of people were saying, well, it ain't going to be a receiver. It's going to probably be Dalton Schultz because none of the receivers are any good. And then it's been the opposite, actually. It's been like, hey, the receivers are actually okay. And Dalton Schultz is just kind of like there. He's just kind of like around. And it doesn't feel like there's any kind of special anything to it. Like you wouldn't guess that this is someone that's being paid $9 million and was one of your marquee signings of the free agency period. Like you just would not think that. So I'm curious to see how between Dalton Schultz himself, what he's going to do to get himself more involved in the offense, make himself more available, and Bobby Slowick in terms of like how important is it that he get that guy involved, or do they just look at it over time and just be like, well, he ain't open and it ain't really much hidden for, it's not that part of it is not really hidden for much. And so we're just going to move on and focus on other things.
Well, then again, if that is the case, then again, Nick, I'm looking at you, right? I'm looking at you. You brought in Dalton Schultz, right? That's a $9 million hit for, I know it's a 1-year deal, but, speaking of tight ends, I heard Brevin Jordan's name, and I hate to say this, but I forget he's on the team, right? I'm like, oh, that's right. Because remember a couple of years ago, we thought that Brevin Jordan was really, he really had a lot of upside. And so here we are now, and he is still here. We will see. You mentioned Will Anderson Jr., he is definitely going to be a leader on this team. And he was on the sideline at one point in the game, kind of talking to the players, talking to the team. And we asked him post-game in the locker room, what were you saying? And here's Will Anderson on his sideline talk.
We're a fourth-quarter team. We're built for this, all training camp, all, off-season. This is what we've been building for and stacking for when we get into games like this. And, like I said, I think we did a better job in the second half trying to come out and trying to play to the standard, but we still have a ways to go to keep going, to keep building that foundation and keep playing to our standard.
I like him. I like his. He's clearly gonna be a leader. And I'm just gonna. I had a moment last week when I was watching the Colts game. I'm going back another week. I mean, watching the Ravens game, and I saw Clowney, and I was like, man, wouldn't that be cool, right? If Clowney's on one side, okay, I digress. Anyway, Will Anderson Jr. is going to be all right. I just wanted to say that. I think he's going to be all right.
I think, look, this was not a big Will Anderson Jr. game, and I know I was in a couple of group chats saying, hey, I know he didn't stand out today, and I know he even got exposed in a couple of plays here and there, but I just look at his effort, his relentlessness, his commitment, and his attitude on top of ability. Like, I know I just sound like I gave you a bunch of platitudes, but on top of actual ability, it makes you feel like, hey, even if there's a game or two where he's neutralized, or there's a game or two where, like, especially once Gardner Minshew got in the game, they're just getting the ball out quick and not giving you much a chance to get home, not giving you much chance to get to the quarterback. Those games will exist. But as far as pass rushers go, and as far as like football players go, and attitude and sort of what you want the model to be, what the tone it is that you want to set for your organization and your franchise, Will Anderson embodies it. Okay, so had a pretty good game the first game, had a pedestrian game the second game. I fully anticipate this guy to be a factor going forward for the Texans for the foreseeable future, for as long as he wants to play football.
It is again, we're in week 2. It's a lot. There's a lot of football left to be played, and for your week 3 opponent to be Jacksonville, the Jaguars in Jacksonville, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough, and we'll see what you got, because we're going to know that coming up on Sunday. And Mike says he thought that Dalton Schultz, like you, was going to be CJ's best friend in this offense, but then he said, let me see the ski. He said, not wanting to say this, but is Dalton Schultz trying to do things the ski mask way this year? I mean, I don't know. Like, you think he's trying to hide? I don't know what he's doing. I kept thinking he's going to get the timing. He's going to get there, but they're all new with CJ, right? They all just met him. It's not like he is in his second year and some of the guys know him better. So I'm looking at you, Dalton Schultz, you know?
Yeah. I would add to that, to your last sentence. I'm looking at you, Dalton Schultz, right? CJ, if there's another thing we can give him credit for, it's that he sees the field very well.
Yes.
And so it's not like it's a case of either one or two of these things, that he's locked in on a particular receiver and can't see Dalton Schultz, or like, you know, it doesn't like Dalton. There's just none of that, right? It's
right.
not any of the reasons why you might think a quarterback doesn't go to a target specifically, other than he's either not being featured in the offense, or he's just not clearly and obviously open, or a good option throughout the whatever reads that he has in a given play. So that is surprising. And to your point about Caserio and just overall about how the team has been constructed, hey man, you've got players. Let's just run it down real quick. The offensive line, heavily invested in, can't stay healthy, and in some cases underperforming on top of that.
Can't play.
All right. And then some of your marquee signings. I get, you know, Jimmy Ward, we're expecting to be a big part of this defense. But you look around and you're like, man, the biggest signings were Jimmy Ward and Dalton Schultz, and an underrated one was Hassan Ridgeway. And like, you got
another big one was Shaq Mason.
Shaq Mason was probably the biggest, because that was a trade, but then they signed him to an extension.
Right. Extension.
So that's like on top, that's like basically both. And you look around and you're like, man, those guys are either unhealthy or underperforming, or both. You know, and it's like, okay, well, so what is this exactly? Now, you got to give him credit for, you know, I think like some of the moves along the margins are like a Steven Nelson.
Yeah.
I thought Des King over the last couple of years, I know he's not on the team anymore, but there are some moves along the margins that have been pretty good. But there have been some moves along the margins that has been like, what is going on here? So,
well, I think one of the moves along that says what's going on for me is the Des King move. Like, I think that's one that has us all going, what do you mean he was cut? I mean, clearly the Kenyon Green move was just, that alone is almost malpractice. But we'll just move on from that. I don't know what they're doing, and I think we'll find out. Good morning to Charles Drayton, our resident, our legal expert. Man, I can't even begin to think about what happened with that impeachment. That impeachment trial. I can't wait to talk to you about it. Tony Dale, our resident Cowboy fan. I am going to talk about the Cowboys, and of course, Mike in Nashville, and my sister Sylvia. Good morning. Good morning. Also, want to make sure that I say happy birthday to son Syria. She's usually a big Chalk Talk fan. She usually comes on because she's got questions, but today is her birthday. Let's talk real quick about, before we get to the Cowboys, let me get your thoughts on just the injuries through the first 2 weeks of the season. They have been severe. Listen, football is a game where you're going to have people hurt and banged up. But we've seen some really just devastating injuries through 2 weeks. I did a show with Isaiah last week, or I think it aired yesterday. And the question was, we had a couple of former NFL players on with us talking about turf versus grass. When Aaron Rodgers went down, that became the conversation. Oh, it was the turf. But I don't know that is the case. I mean, I know in Nashville, for instance, they have removed the turf, removed the grass, and gone back to turf. It's about 50-50 around the country about which is which. But it must be something more than that that is leading to or facilitating some of these injuries, right? You saw what happened with Aaron Rodgers. You saw last night what happened with
Nick Chubb.
And we've seen others. I mean, we saw, Jalen Petrie have something happen with his lung. And I mean, there's just a lot of injuries happening. And here's the thing I wonder. They get a lot of days off. I think some of that's good during camp. I mean, I'm going to go back to when I played tennis, competitively. You got to build up the calluses and stuff on your hands and have that pounding on your feet, which makes you more ready for the pounding day in, day out. So I think you've got to be able to balance we've got to give you breaks, because since this is 2023, we know better. We have to do better but we still have to get your body ready for this kind of impact. And I don't know if they're not getting enough readiness before they start going full impact every week. I don't know the answer, but it does make me wonder.
It's got to make you wonder, but I always go back to the fact that this is, and this goes without saying, everybody who watches the game, or especially who played the game, knows this, but it's just a violent and very odd, weird game. It never ceases to amaze me, and it always happens in almost every game where there's a play where I'm like, I can't believe they're out there doing that. Like, I can't believe that they're actually out there. And I know a lot of people who are maybe watching or listening to this are like, man, I played football. We did it. No big deal. It's all good. Man, football is fun, is exciting, and we're here talking about it. I love it to death, but it is insane to run full speed into another person and to just hit them and be like, all right, let's go do that again. And let's do that 60-something times
for 60 minutes, right?
Yeah. And then wonder why we're all hurt. Wonder, how did we get, how did my lung collapse? Why did I break my knee? Well, somebody ran into you full speed, or somebody ran into somebody else. Somebody's ran into somebody else full speed, and you're in the vicinity, and they fell on you. Like last night, what was the play? I think it wasn't a Landon Roberts, but it was a player where Trevor Penning is the offensive lineman that's engaging with a defensive lineman on the other side for the Browns, and they just fall into a guy's leg. Or no, I'm sorry, I said the Browns. It was the Saints played the Panthers, but the Panthers player just basically drives Trevor Penning into another guy's leg. The guy didn't have nothing to do with the play. The play was over with, but it still happened because the game is just that patently absurd. You mentioned Jalen Petrie, who I got to talk to not too long after whenever he got back to Houston after the play against Lamar Jackson. He's coming on a blitz from the outside, and it's just showing on the blitz. And Lamar Jackson is kind of just trying to get rid of it, kicks his leg out, catches him right in the chest with his knee. Like not on purpose, but not on purpose either, because he's trying to just make a play. So it wasn't on purpose or not on purpose. It just happened. And he collapses his lung. And it was this is what we talked about too when I approached Jalen. I was like, man, the thing that kills me about that play that had you in the hospital is that overnight in another city is that it was such an innocuous play. Like I watched it in real time, didn't think anything of it. And then and then he's coming off the field and he's actually coughing up blood, and I can't really tell because my eyes are bad. But then I watch it the second time, and I still didn't think much of it. Even on the second one, I'm like, oh, no big deal. And it bruised his lung, had him in the hospital. So it just goes to show how brutal of a game it is, and just how
it's
hard
a violent game. And we can talk about this later. I mean, we talk, the phenomenon that is Deion Sanders at Colorado, but Travis Hunter, who has a lacerated liver because of a dirty late hit. And I was listening to some medical professionals talk about how that could have been a real medical emergency, because that could have sent him into cardiac arrest, right? So it's a violent game. We know that about it. It's tough. Before we talk about these Cowboys, because I want to know what you think and if you think they're real, and I want to talk about Jerry Jones, who I think is a little hypocritical. Here's something to just kind of clean our little timeline. So Bun B is now selling Trill burgers at NRG Stadium. Okay. He talks about how he started this business 2 years ago and he's gotten so much support. Of course, obviously his name helps, but it's relationships, right? As a business owner, you always think like, man, look what he's been able to do in 2 years. And it is, part of it is he is Bun B. So that's really helpful, right? And so when we talked to him before the game on Sunday, he also was asked, well, have other teams ask you, and how do you manage that? Because obviously the bottom line is this is a business. What would you do if somebody wanted you to have the Trill burgers in their stadium? And here's how he answered that.
We have a bottom line to worry about.
Well, look, I mean, we've had different teams and organizations ask us for our services. The first thing we do is call here, right? And make sure that it's not a problem with them. The Dolphins were actually the first when they were here practicing for their preseason game. The first thing I did was, hey, do you guys mind if we feed the Dolphins? Now, when we get, I'll just be very honest. If we're playing the Cowboys, that could present a problem. If the Astros are playing the Yankees or the Dodgers, that could present a problem, right? So, I mean, we have to take all that kind of stuff into consideration. But I am not trying to spoil this beautiful relationship when I have with the Texans to feed anybody.
I thought that was kind of cool. You got to know where your bread is buttered, and I can appreciate that about him. Speaking of the Cowboys, they're 2-0. They pitched shutouts the first 2 weeks. The defense is incredibly impressive. I think after week 1, when people were going into that game, when they were playing the Giants at their place, and the talk about Dak Prescott and the turnovers, which I always thought was like, man, we know that's last year is not the norm for him. He has done well at protecting the ball for the most part. And then we see the night after that, Josh Allen, like, this is a dude you got to talk about when you talk about turnovers. He's been a turnover machine. I don't know if Dak Prescott has what it takes to get him through playoffs. We haven't seen him yet. I think that's fair to say. He hasn't been good enough in playoff games to take them to the next level. However, Cowboys defense looks good. Mike McCarthy looks like he's comfortable in the role of being the play caller. But I want to talk about their owner, who there have been these comments now with Mike Trotter, who's come out, Jim Trotter rather, who is suing the league. He used to be a part of the NFL Network. He was not renewed. He says it's because of some direct comments, direct questions he asked Roger Goodell, who was ultimately the big boss, about diversity, the lack of diversity and inclusion, about the lack of African-American head coaches, and those conversations. It just didn't go over well. And so he's suing the league. But he also talked about having conversations with a couple of, hearing from a couple of owners, the owner of the Bills, Pagula, basically, who said, was it Pagula who said, if Black players aren't happy about ownership, they should I don't know, go back to Africa. I don't know which one
Yeah,
said which,
it
but it
was
was
a Bills
something.
owner. Yep.
It was a Bills owner, right? Whose daughter is in case, just a little side note, plays on the WTA tour. She's a tennis player, professional player, and she plays doubles with Coco Gauff. So that can't go well. Anyway, um, I know, right? But then there's the Jerry Jones comments, and so where he has made comments about, I don't know. I guess he wants us, like, he pulled himself up from the bootstraps. That's not what he said, but that was the inference. But now he's come out and he said, you know what? I love this game and I love the league. He should, because it's made him even more money. And I would go across the state of Texas to help, I guess African Americans and to have ownership. Really? Because that's not who you've been. That's not who you were during the Colin Kaepernick situation. That's not who you were when you told the guys on your team they better stand up. I mean, maybe he's different now. I mean, I'm trying to be, that side, the good Kim open. Let's see your different side. I want to believe that you're different. I just don't really believe he's different. I don't know.
Nah, he's a politician. He's a politician. Yeah. He's a diplomat, but he also has like the luxury of having the money and the cachet to not have to really care about the same things that the politicians and the diplomats care about. Right. So he presents the same way that they do and tries to like still, still try to present that way and still toe the party line and say the right things. That was what the kneeling thing was too, right? It's like, all right, so this kneeling is a thing now, but I know I don't really believe in it, and I know that a lot of people that I do believe in don't believe in it. So how can I bring this phenomenon together with what I actually think? And what does he do? He gets the whole team to come together and lock arms and kneel, which was the most empty gesture that you'd ever find. It was like, okay, so what statement is this making exactly?
Right. What are y'all doing?
Other than I want to be friends with everybody who feels a certain way, the kneelers and the folks who think, so seriously that we've got to stand up for the national anthem. It was like, oh, this is a very political, a very apolitical, right down the middle party line type of thing, seemingly in an effort to move on and make sure that the bottom line is not affected. Everybody gets along so we can keep making this money. And so that's the way that I view Jerry Jones. I think that he's just saying this because he feels like it's the right thing to say and that you can say it without actually having to do anything. Like Jerry Jones can make this point without anyone ever calling him on it and saying, okay, so what are you actually doing to make this happen? What, like, how can we verify that this is how you feel? You can't. And you get the advantage of the fact that, hey, the odds and circumstances are stacked against black ownership to begin with. And so Jerry Jones gets to just say, hey, we're working towards minority ownership. And if it never happens, oops, we tried. And if it does, he gets to take the credit for it.
Well, here's the thing, though. I think that what we can do is we can say all those things because all those things you just said are true. Byron Allen has written an open letter. One of our black billionaires who is big in the media landscape in terms of ownership of stations and enterprises across the country. He has also apparently made a pitch to Disney to buy ABC, right? As Disney is kind of looking at really going more to, or ABC is going more towards streaming or whichever it is. And he's also talked about having an interest in ownership. But at the end of the day, it comes down to this. I mean, I remember, because I've done this a really long time, covering the National Football League, when there was an ownership group put together back in the day. This is Bill Cosby show, Bill Cosby, when he basically saved NBC, the network, before all of the things came out with his legal issues in recent years. The group included Bill Cosby and it included Walter Payton. Right. But at the end of the day, it's not about your not only about your financial wherewithal. The guys in the room, the other dudes, they got to say, yeah, come on, Brandon, you can be in. And they didn't say yes to a group with Walter Payton, Sweetness, and Bill Cosby. I just saved NBC single-handedly.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we can see what are you doing to be open to, because here's what I always say when we talk about inclusion and diversity. And I see it in every level. It is about advocacy. It is not about, well, you're not really qualified, or I don't think you'd be good at it. It is somebody saying, you know what, we're going to let Kim in the room. We know she qualified. She had to get here a different way because that's just what their paths require. I know Brandon has the wherewithal to do this. And if I look on paper and you go, okay, resume to resume, which who's reading those these days? Oh, it looks different because we have to take different paths. Or I'm looking at your finances and okay, you've got this over here, Byron Allen, but you didn't come to it the way that Jerry Jones did. It takes Jerry Jones saying, no, I'm put my hand up. I think we should let this one in so we can know, because he would have to do something. Just saying anything, it means absolutely nothing. It means nothing. And so I'm glad
but
that
honestly,
Jim Trotter put himself out there. I mean, he put himself on the line to challenge the establishment. That's never easy. You rarely win. But if you're about the cause, those are the kind of stands we have to take. So I just say that just to circle back to applaud Jim Trotter.
Yeah, well, I think that the cause is worthwhile, and it's something that we've been talking about for years. And hopefully that it's not too many more years that we have to continue to talk about this in terms of like equity and representation and just the things that really matter. Like we spend a lot of time talking about X's and O's or talking about storylines that are more related to the game. But when it comes down to it, there is a real life element that sports reflects of real life that is not becoming and not kind to history, if you will. And so hopefully through Jim Trotter's efforts, and if Jerry Jones does at some point get a conscience, or just somebody like him, it doesn't even necessarily have to be Jerry Jones. It could be any number of people that have the influence of similar stature and are just willing to say, hey, enough is enough, or right is right and wrong is wrong. And hey, we're going to try to actually, make an effort to make this more equitable. But, until that happens, though, Kim, call me skeptical. Like circling back to the original point about like how serious is he about this? Like, come on. I don't believe you. You need more people. I don't think that you really care about this issue. I'm sorry.
Yeah. I don't think he does either. And that's the Cowboys owner. And I agree with you. I want to say also hello to my friend Joanne, who's with us from Los Angeles. Before we hop to baseball real quick, let me ask you this. How good will this Dallas Cowboys team be? What do you think?
I think they have a chance to go to the Super Bowl. I really do. Like, I think that the NFC is that wide open. And like, I understand that if you want to minimize what they've done so far and just say, hey, they've beaten the New York teams. And one of the New York teams lost their quarterback, and the other New York team nobody actually believes in and thinks is fraudulent, and thinks they're even more so fraudulent after what happened with them losing to the Cowboys 40-0. Like, instead of them beating them by that margin, saying something about the Cowboys, it more so than anything just confirmed what everybody thought about the Giants, which I thought was funny. But legitimately, I think, and this is going back to a point we were making about Dak earlier, at least I think so. I don't think he's a guy who elevates a team that's good, mediocre to good, and makes them a Super Bowl contender. Right. But a team that's already got Super Bowl talent around him, is he good enough to take a team like that to the Super Bowl? Absolutely. I think absolutely. Now, is there too much Cowboys stink? Is there too much bad mojo and energy around them to allow them to make it? I don't know. It could be. It's been almost 30 years. I get it. It's been a long time.
I was actually there. It's been longer than 30 years. I was at their last Super Bowl when they beat the Bills in Pasadena. It was the LA Super Bowl before they came back and were in SoFi. And that was in 1992.
Well, they won in 95, right? They won in because they won the back.
So maybe it was 95. They won the back-to-backs.
Yeah, they won in I forget the back, but they won in 90. The last one was in 95.
95. So whichever one that was, that's the one I went to. Well, I went to both of them.
Yeah, but it's been a long time. It's been a long time. I mean, people have grown. People that was not born are grown. I was a young boy at the time, and I'm very grown. So it has been a long time. But this is a good team. That offensive line, Dak Prescott, I think if he goes, kind of going back to your point, Kim, about that season last year was kind of an anomaly. It shocked me to see him get a ball away as much as he did. But if he goes back to being like the Dak Prescott we understood him to be before that, the on-brand Dak Prescott with what they have up front on both sides of the ball and that defense, the NFC, outside of the Eagles and the 49ers, I mean, we're really talking about the Eagles, the 49ers, the Cowboys, and I mean, really, like, unless somebody else surprises us, like in terms of being on that level, like I don't see anybody from the NFC South being that level. The Saints, if Derek Carr was
the next level,
if
they're
he
the
was
next tier.
If he was good, they would be right there. Because they got Chris Olave and they got a really good defense. We saw that on Monday Night Football. Like if Derek Carr was just a little better, I think people would be a lot more sold on the Saints than they are. But it's just hard to really get around a team that's quarterbacked by Derek Carr. It's hard to really see that. So
it's hard to see it.
So absent of that, you got really the Eagles,
the 49ers,
and the Cowboys.
Yeah, we thought the Seahawks, but we don't know.
I think those first three. I think those first three are clearly better.
And then there's the next level. But then again, we're in week 2, so we'll see. Yeah. All right, last thing, real quick, Denver. Is Russ Wilson done? Is Sean Payton not as good as we thought he was?
Yes.
On both?
Yes. Is the short answer. No, look, I think I was listening to somebody on radio talk about it. I might have actually been listening to Dallas radio, funny enough, talk about this sort of out of market topic, which is kind of funny to bring it back here. But they were saying how like one of the Dallas, they had to have put on a Homer hat, and they were like, I'm so sick of Sean Payton being this overrated coach. He gets put in the top 10 and Mike McCarthy gets put in the bottom 10. And I tell you what, I'd rather have Mike McCarthy over Sean Payton and Russell Wilson. And I was like, man, you want to talk about some week 2 overreactions, boy. Because that's a whole list of people that might be has-beens for all we know. But right now, Mike McCarthy looks up because they're 2-0, and Russell Wilson doesn't look like anything like what he used to, and we're still trying to figure out. Like I'm willing to be a little bit patient to see how the Sean Payton Russell Wilson matchup goes, or I should say partnership goes. But I don't know, man. Like this looks like another one for me that's headed toward disaster, and just two guys that have won Super Bowl and it used to be thought of as great that are just going to be like, this is going to be the forgettable stop that they had in their career.
I'm not super optimistic, especially the way that Sean kind of came out and wanted to let everybody know that he was putting Russ on notice. I thought, if that's what you're doing, why can't it be internal, right? Why does the world have to know that you're telling him to stop kissing babies, which is, that was obviously a metaphor for, him to be more focused. I was like, yeah, that's not good. It's not productive. All right, so let's go to baseball before we get out of here. We've got to talk a little bit about the Astros. They are in a pennant race. We have a week and a half to 13 games left in the season or so. They're home now playing the Baltimore Orioles, a very good baseball team, right? A very good baseball team. And they lost a tough one last night. I was there. Man, that was a tough one to lose. But before the game, we talked to Dusty, and somebody asked him, which would you rather? Do you like this being in a race for the pennant, or would you like for it to kind of be decided? And he chuckled and said, yeah, I'd rather for it to be decided. But he said it's because you get a chance to set your pitching. But here is him talking about this current pennant race, if you will.
And you can rest guys. So, every year is different. Like I told everybody before the year started, it's going to take less victories and to play everybody on the schedule. And there are teams that are improved in our division, and so that makes for a closer race, because these teams weren't going to just let us just keep running away with it without trying to make some improvements themselves. You see Texas made major improvements. You see Seattle. I mean, they were working on improvements last year. You know, when they got Castillo, and this year they went and got Hernandez, and you know, they finished strong last year. And the Angels had made big improvement, but all their improvements got hurt, you know, during the course of the year. So yeah, I mean, you miss Rendon and you miss Ohtani, and you start missing key parts of your Trout. I mean, that's a major difference.
Yeah.
Listen, I think that one of the things, the reason I played that clip is because, and I'm gonna let you hear from Verlander, who was a starting pitcher last night, and also from Ryan Presley, who gave it up in the ninth, 3-run homer, which really sealed the game for the Orioles. I think that people forget, like Dusty said, no one's going to just sit back and just watch us keep taking it, running away with it. And they've made changes, you know, and so when I look at this Astros roster and this season, the fact that they are here, yes, they're 4-6 in the last 10 games. They're a game and a half ahead of still the Rangers and the Mariners, but they were without Altuve for what, 40 games maybe. They were without Alvarez off and on quite a bit. They hadn't had Brantley since it seems like Jesus walked the earth. I mean, he just came back about a few weeks ago. They had him. He hadn't been here all season. He was out since last summer. They had 3 pitchers who started last year who were gone. JV, Justin Verlander, he was gone they didn't re-sign him, which I thought was the right thing because of the numbers. Luis Garcia got hurt at the very beginning of the season, out for the season. And then Lance McCullers out for the season. And then, oh yeah, by the way, the regular injuries you get along the way. And then people are a little wondering like, man, why aren't they doing more? They needed to be in a hunt is what I said. And they are. And they've got to win the games that they didn't win like last night. But yeah, I don't think you can expect other people, the other teams in the division or in the American League to just say, that's the Astros. We'll stay in pat.
Yeah, I think that the last 6 years, Kim, for the Astros have made it to where a Houston sports fan is as spoiled as they've ever been.
Oh.
Houston sports fans, and then I guess I would say specifically Astros fans, are as spoiled as they have ever been because of this success. And because, like, I think that in part because Dusty Baker was able to come in here and take a team that was sort of already built to win a World Series and take it to, like, I know they didn't go to the World Series that year, but they went the next year and then they won it the year after that. Like, because they've been able to sort of maintain that level of success, they've been able to take the team for granted and also take Dusty Baker for granted and then just say, well, of course we're here. Of course we're going to win every game and we're going to win the World Series and we're going to blow teams out by 10 runs and it's just going to be great. That's not reality, man. It's a hard game to begin with. It's probably the hardest game out of all of them, not counting the physical grind or the physical toll that football takes on you, but just like in terms of degree of difficulty, it's the hardest game out there. And look, man, like we've been saying, they make changes every year. The Rangers looked up and were like, man, the Astros are dominating. The Mariners looked up and said, hey, we haven't been to the postseason longer than anybody in North American pro sports, much less Major League Baseball. Finally did it last year. And everybody's just tired of failing and tired of losing and tired of looking up at the Astros. And so, yeah, you're going to have a natural like this effort to reach where the Astros had gotten to, but also it's going to be impossible to maintain the level of which they were on in, say, from 2017 to 2019, that little run of they won the World Series, had a disappointing year in 2018, but maybe had their best year overall in 2019 when they actually didn't win the World Series.
Until AJ Hinch blew it in Game 7.
AJ Hinch. Yes, AJ Hinch.
Nobody wants to talk about that. Shout out to AJ. Y'all want to ride Dusty.
Yeah.
Shout out to AJ Hinch.
Now,
Gary Cole said, holla at me. Gary Cole said, holla at me.
Now, I'm with you on the noise bit, but I know plenty of people that are here for the smoke with AJ Hinch that are like, look, I will never forget. We will never forget how you just let Gary Cole sit up there and collect dust and then go to New York. New York. Leave the team, leave the organization, and not even have to, like, at least help us win this World Series in Game 7. Like, at the very least, and they knew he was going to leave. They wasn't going to pay him $300 million. At the very least, pitch him.
I'm out of him.
Man, I would have pitched his arm off.
And he wanted to play. He was sitting out in the bullpen looking like, this what we doing? He was hot. Remember when he came in and
Yeah,
he whipped the Astros hat first?
yeah.
Got
It's
into it with Gene.
representative
Yeah,
of himself is what he
yeah,
said. But look, no, it's
of himself.
but the issue is what you said. The American League is better, specifically the AL West is better, and the Astros, in part because they've been snake bitten by injuries, and
Yeah,
in part because of just attrition over. They're not as good. It's not as good of a team. It's not
yeah.
as good of a team. So if the Baltimore Orioles didn't exist, and if their story wasn't as interesting and as compelling as it is, and so credit to them for being what they are, Dusty Baker would be a manager of the year candidate, and he should
Absolutely.
be top 3. You know, he should. I don't think he should win it because it should probably go to the Orioles guy, but he should be up there. He should be.
He should be
votes
up
after
there.
him.
And you make a good point because Bob Nightingale, who's the baseball columnist for for USA Today, is in town, and I was talking to him before the game yesterday, and we talked about that Baltimore is what the Astros used to be, right?
Yep.
It's the story because the Astros were this team's 6-7 years ago, and now they've been building. It's a process. Astros fans think they hot now. Wait until next year when you have all these free agents come up because you can't pay everybody, right? But you mentioned something. We talked about Verlander, who got the start last night. Here is a Verlander. After I'll let you hear from Verlander and then Presley before we get out of here. Here's JV.
Interesting question. I don't think it's the same season as last season. I think a lot of things have changed. Pitch clock, lack of shift. A few other things are a little bit different. So I don't really think it's one of those things that you can compare. I mean, I think pitching across the league hasn't quite been as dominant this season as it was the last couple of years. So, I guess I'm just trying to find the best version of myself that I can this year.
And so the question had been, how do you compare how you are this year to last year? And that's when he said, it's different. And I thought it was interesting to hear him with that perspective. And here's Ryan Presley, who obviously looks unhappy after he gave up that 3-run homer in the top of the ninth, and the Astros just couldn't come back from it.
I mean, stuff was good. It's a well-located pitch. It's just, I'm sure he was sitting on it. He got his pitch that he wanted to hit and took advantage of it.
So you were getting the execution moments.
Yeah. It's not in the middle part of the plate. 9 out of 10 times people roll that pitch over. It's just, he just went down and got it.
You haven't pitched too much this month. Do you feel sharp going out there?
Yeah. It's my job to stay sharp.
How tough of a loss is this?
It is his job to stay sharp. He didn't look great. He hasn't looked great a lot. At times this season. And Charles said pitching's an issue. Pitching has been an issue. It has been an issue, but last night was that was a gut punch. That was a tough one to lose last night. And I'll head out there later this evening, but hopefully I'll get it done today.
You know what's interesting to me about this is that we know that Dusty Baker gets a lot of criticism, and most of it disproportionate, a lot of it unwarranted. Some of them, I've got some things that, but a lot of it is just like, whoa, but, and we also know that Brent Strom, when he was here, got a lot of praise. Oh, right. Strummy, we love old Brent Strom. and I think it was, a lot of that was warranted because he's a good pitching coach. Like I understand all of these things, but I notice how in the midst of all of this, nobody talks about the pitching coach now.
Right.
I never hear anything about Josh Miller. It's a lot of talk about Maldy and what kind of game he calls, or Dusty Baker and what kind of game he manages.
But nothing to do with the pitching coach.
Nothing about the pitching coach, Josh Miller, and how the pitchers are being coached and managed from that standpoint. I just think it's interesting. I'm not pretending to know for sure that he should be feet held to the fire, but it's just interesting to me that this doesn't happen. The way the narratives are constructed and the way the conversations are had, they change and they vary depending on who it is, and you don't really always get a good sense for why. So, why is it that the pitching has taken a step back? And you've already articulated, Kim, how they've been snake bitten by the injury bug.
Yeah.
But there hasn't been nearly as much energy about, man, because it's not like Dusty Baker makes decisions in a vacuum either about who to pitch and when to pitch him and all of that. Like, he's relying heavily on also the people around him, okay? Because that's one of the things that makes a great leader, right? Is to know the people around you that know more than you do or might have a better expertise in one particular thing. And Dusty strikes me as that kind of guy. And so I feel like he's relying on the pitching staff now just as much as he did when Brent Strom was here. And it might not just be as good. It's a possibility that it's not as good, on top of the fact that the health isn't there. So, but I do like, going back to that clip, I do like Presley taking ownership of, hey, it's my responsibility to stay sharp. That was, for the record, that was the right answer. That was the right answer.
And he also said, listen, he felt that he said he thought his stuff was good. And like Justin, I didn't play the clip, but Verlander said sometimes, I mean, those guys can hit. You know, he said, like, the one he gave up, it says, it's not one that'll keep me up at night. You know, and then Presley was saying, you know, he didn't have it just sitting over the middle of the plate. You know, usually they roll that one over. He was waiting on it. He got it. He got a good piece of it. I mean, sometimes you just, you know, you throw what you got, and what you got, you got to tip your hat. It's not as good. As Charles said, it's not as good. And if you threw what you had, right, and it wasn't good enough, what do you say?
Yeah. I mean, the location was where you wanted it. You didn't feel like you left a meatball over the plate. And this is one of those situations where you tip the cap, a guy goes down, digs it out, and goes and sends it out. Like they are professionals too, you know. And that's a cliche. People don't like to hear that, but sometimes that cliche rears its head, and you're like, oh, like, you know, when they're losing to the A's, right? And you're like, and I get this. You're like, how could they lose to the A's? The A's are terrible. And then I appreciated my guy, Adam Spillane, who works with me at Sports Radio 610. They had him on one of the shows. And, like, everybody was, you know, emotional about losing to the A's. And he's like, I hate to break it to you, but the A's have traded for some pretty good prospects. And we're starting to see some of those guys are actually, maybe they're not good yet, but we're seeing that somebody's going to be good again eventually. Like, you know, the point being that they got a bunch of young players that are prospects that are not fully developed but have talent. So it's like you don't get to just take for granted. Going back again to taking the game for granted, being spoiled, and just thinking like everything's supposed to just come easy because you've had this success. That ain't how the game is played. It just ain't.
And as Charles said, we'll give him the final word. The game is difficult, right? Mm-hmm. It's not a super easy game to play.
It's hard.
They play 162 games. Did you think they were going to go undefeated? And the other teams, some of them going to win some games. In those years where the Astros were horrible and they lost 100, they also won a few. There are people along the way that were on the other side of this conversation like, you lost to the Astros? Well, somebody's going to win a game sometimes, right? So that's what it is. Listen,
yes.
To be at this point of the season and to be right there, that's all you can want.
It's a season, honestly, that's going to go down in infamy and in history. I don't know how it's going to end, but you laid it out. They lost. They chose not to bring back Justin Verlander for business reasons, and we all could understand why. And then we're able to get him back for like pennies on the dollar, which is crazy in and of itself. And then on top of that, they lose Lance McCullers. They lose Luis Garcia. Jose Urquidy was out for a long time. Christian Javier is kind of an underrated story of like a guy that didn't realize his potential, that people thought, hey, he's going to take that next step, and he just hasn't. And so all of these things happen all at once in a season, and you're like, oh, well, why aren't they as good? Well, all of these things went wrong for them, you know, and they were all things that could reasonably go wrong for you, as wild as they were.
And Altuve, I mean, who is, you know, just, you know, people talk about a freak of nature. I mean, he's a little one, but I mean, I saw him hit a couple balls last night. I mean, and I'm like, gosh, he's got some power.
Yeah.
Although I read a stat sheet that called him 5'8", I'm like, he is not, right? He's all of about 5'5".
Yeah.
But what a pro he is. Hey, listen, Brandon, I appreciate you for being a part of Chalk Talk. we always have an extended version when you're here because there's so much to get to. You and I are going to do some stuff on IG, but you're going to come back sooner. It's been a lot happening just in life. So thank you for being here today. I appreciate you making time for us. I'll get some notes and you'll make my audience, I'll get a feather in my cap for this one. So thank you.
No, thank you for having me. Thank the audience for welcoming me and for wanting to bring me back. Like, look, Kim, you are a connected person who knows a lot of interesting people. And so that I get to be like in the mix of that, or that I get to be somebody that is sought out and within that group is an honor for me. So thank y'all for thinking of me. I appreciate it.
Ever since I discovered how to play the applause to get the applause in the show, I don't use it often, but you're definitely worth it. Hey, thank you, my friend. I'll see you next time. I'm sure I'll see you with the Texans in a day or two. Have a great rest of your day, and still looking forward to making dinner for you and the kids.
Absolutely, looking forward to it. I'll see y'all soon.
All right, thanks. That was Brandon Scott from Sports Radio 610. Good friend, good person, good journalist, and super happy that he was able to join us today. Hey, thanks a lot, Paul and Charles, for being a part of the show. Hey, remember a few things, guys. They've got a new COVID vaccine out. I'm going to encourage you to get it. COVID is still out. It's active. It's rampant. Make sure that you're taken care of. And also, make sure that you're registered to vote. I never tell you who to vote for, but I'm always going to encourage you to register. Stay registered so you don't have to get registered. It is important that you get registered, do that first, and then in the process, make sure that you become informed. All I'm going to say is vote your values. I trust if you do that we'll all be in good spot. Make it a great, great week. I'll see you next Tuesday right here on Chalk Talk. And in the meantime, follow me across all of the platforms so that we can stay connected. Have a great week, everybody. Peace.